consumers dead. I think there's just a huge misconception around what entrepreneurship is. Number one rule of business is like address a need, not just like what you want to exist. Every single thing they do is driven by data. The biggest thing that I noticed that I had no idea coming into that interview was how much data they use. They are a data company through and through. Cringe is the price of entry. Humans have taste and AI platforms do not have taste. Women and women of color and people of color are going to have less funding than a white man will. It's a reflection of like where investors want to put their money, because oftentimes investors are also white men. In order to catch our eyes as under 30 reporters, you have to have.
Who is Alex York and what do you do at Forbes?
Yes, well, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me. I'm excited to talk about everything that we're both working on, and there's so many exciting things happening within like the young female founder community. But for those who don't know me, I'm Alex York. I'm an editor at Forbes, overseeing the 30 under 30 list, which is our like list of our global list of young like movers, shakers, people changing industries. We have 20 different categories for the US list and 10 different categories for the European list. So really kind of like generalist reporting in terms of industry, but always focused on young founders, young creatives, young creators who are, working to change the industries that have existed for so long.
And how does your day-to-day look like?
It's a little bit different every day, honestly, and it's very seasonal, I would say. We have, for our team, we have two main lists that we work on every year. So that's the European list, which we're working on right now, which is why I'm in London. And then we have the US list, as I mentioned. The US list kicks off in around like June and then goes through December when we publish that. And then January starts up and then we start the European list until about April. So those two chunks of the year are really focused on like sourcing candidates, learning more about who are the up and comers in these different industries, a lot of like industry sourcing, talking with investors, just like meeting young founders and doing a lot of like back end reporting to generate the candidate pool. And then as we get closer and closer in time to when the lists launch, then there's a lot more like deep diving, a lot of due diligence, talking with the people that we are considering for the list and just like kind of narrowing it down and down and down and down until we come up with the final 30. In between those and like kind of surrounding them, I'll also work on a newsletter that we have every Friday. So each week we publish kind of like under 30 news about young founders, entrepreneurship, business that would be relevant to like our generation of readers. So that comes out every Friday. So each week we work on that. And then here and there we'll do either feature stories, whether that's like a long form like written piece or sometimes like feature video stuff. And then a little bit of like podcasting and things along the way too. So all that's to say, like all of these different aspects of my job are kind of like sprinkled into each day whenever I have like time for them or like whatever that season of life requires of me.
And then speaking of young founders, before you joined Forbes, you were reporting on Gen Z and the future of work. Can I have your take on how is Gen Z building businesses nowadays?
I think that the bigger difference that I've seen between Gen Z and older generations maybe isn't in the founder space, but in the employee space. Like I covered a lot of how young employees are like coming into the workforce. What do they want? How much do they want to work? Like, do they care about things like work-life balance, which in the US, like historically has not really been a topic of conversation. It's just like you start your career and that's it. Like that's the rest of life. So I actually covered a lot of how American Gen Zers are interested in like European ways of living and working and longer lunches and longer summer breaks and just these sorts of things that allow people to have more aspects of themselves than just their career. So I found that, and this was right after COVID as well, when a lot of this started to change too, and people were working from home and had like kind of an inkling of, okay, we can have more flexibility. Like we don't have to spend so much of our day to day commuting to work, working, and then commuting home. So I think that the biggest difference between Gen Z and older generations really was that like employee sector of people as opposed to founders. Of course, there are some differences with the founders, like, younger founders tend to be more digitally native, so really rely on things like social media or building out like multimedia platforms like a podcast on top of other things that they're doing or whatever it may be than older generations. But I think like when it comes down to what it takes to build a business, like those principles still remain true regardless of what generation. So there is still like quite a few similarities between all generations when it comes to building brands today, I think.
If I can take you back to your beginnings now, What was this first interview that made you think, okay, this is the world I want to report on?
I don't even know if it was one of mine, more so maybe others that I read and like things that I was coming across in journalism. I think that business reporting wise, it was something I kind of fell into, honestly. I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. And just to take you back a bit further, in school, I did not study journalism. I did not really have this like thought that I was going to be a journalist prior to my junior year of college when COVID hit and one of my internships got canceled, and that was supposed to be like a marketing internship, and that was kind of what I expected that I would go into. And that internship got canceled, so I took a journalism class instead, and I just loved the class. Like I thought it was so exciting. I could think about so many different things and like talk to so many different people. So that kind of showed me like, oh, I maybe I'll want to be a journalist instead of doing something in marketing. So from there, it was kind of accidental that I got my first role at Business Insider, which was a fellowship covering small business and entrepreneurs. And that was my first foray into like talking to young founders. And so I think that it was like kind of a combination of like reading other people's work, finding other journalists that I thought were really interesting, deciding I wanted to like be a journalist in general, and then kind of accidentally falling into a role that forced me to cover young founders every day, which, as you know, like it's such an exciting industry, and like the people who are building businesses are just some of the most like interesting people that I talk to. And I always say like now in my job and at my job then, it was truly like my responsibility to just talk to people that are doing interesting things and learn from them. And so now I think like no matter what conversation I'm in with young people who are building things, trying to change things like from the inside, from the outside, I just learn something like every time I have a conversation.
Did you discover someone that was completely unknown at the time, but then eventually they ended up being huge?
I mean, I think this is like the goal with a lot of the under 30 list is to tap the people who are like just up and coming. And we often say, because people ask like, how do you decide who's on it, or like what is kind of like the premise for being on the list? And we look at it in a similar way that investors might look at companies. So we want to find companies that like have a bit of that traction, aren't like entirely unknown, because we want to have them, have we want them to have a proof of concept and like have some success under their belt, whether that's like funding or revenue or like a large following on social media, whatever it is. So like they typically are known in some degree, but that's oftentimes for the under 30 list like very insular to their industry because they are just starting out. So I think like that's the goal, is to like find the people who are kind of like building, have done like a couple steps along the way, but really are gonna be able to blow up in the future. And so I think that like this really ranges from tech companies. We actually just put out a story recently about the under 30 companies who made the list and then went on to become billionaires. And I think that just spoke a lot. And there were like dozens of under 30s who then went on to build these like $1 billion brands, $1 billion net worths. And I think that that really showed that like we are tapping them early. And then, sometimes it's huge and sometimes people pivot and do something totally different, which is always also interesting to see. But I think there have been, a few that definitely have stood out, especially from the start of the under 30 list when I wasn't even there in 2012 until today, that's definitely happened. But it's always our goal to be like, who's up and coming right now. People maybe know them, but not super well. But what's sometimes more fun is to find the companies that you're like, I feel like I'm just seeing them on social media. Like, for instance, there's a company called Good Girl Snacks, which is a US based company, and they make pickles. And I'm like the biggest ambassador for this company. And months before they made the under 30 list, I started seeing them on social media, and they were doing a really good job, I thought, of like building in public and sharing their story, telling people like, we just quit our jobs, we're making pickles now, like here's what a day in our life is, or here's what the process is, here's what our branding is going to look like, here's how like we're bringing our creative side of our mind into like building this brand. And that was like months prior to them making the list, and it was really when they were first starting out. So it was so exciting to see like them gain that traction, gain both more followers and more sales and more, lines of production. And ultimately, like now they have, had partnerships with like major brands and are expanding in Whole Foods and Erewhon and so many different stores across the US. So that's one that was super fun to me, that like they didn't necessarily have like tons of investor backing or like the really, really strong financials when I first kind of saw them online. But I was like, I feel like there's something here creative wise, like vibe wise. I feel like they're going to be able to like get this like Gen Z consumer really well. And clearly they have so far.
For how long a company would be on your radar or a founder would be on your radar until they would not necessarily make the list, but make the cut to potentially be on the list?
It's different for everybody, honestly. Sometimes it's someone like that who I've been watching for months or even sometimes years when people like apply for years prior and then we kind of keep them in our mind and watch them grow over time as they apply year over year. And so sometimes it is like months or years. Other times it's like when they apply to the under 30 list, that's my first time finding out about them. And then that deep dive really gives me insight into like, okay, this is something that we should pursue here. So it can be as little as like, the reporting timeline and as long as, years that I've been following them or watching them.
What is a common red flag that makes them less credible right away?
I think that the biggest thing, especially from just like the application perspective, because you can go to literally Google Forbes under 30 application and like nominate yourself. The biggest thing that irritates me is when people have like dozens of referrals for them or like nominations for them, but it's all like copy and paste that clearly they just like went to their network and said, "Can you please nominate me for under 30? Here's exactly what you have to put for my bio and for the reasoning of why I should make it." And just like the more the merrier. And for us as reporters, we literally go through every single one of the nominations that come through. And we, as leadership, we make sure also that like all the reporters are also doing this. Like every single one of those lines on the spreadsheet from that initial application does get looked at. So when we see people that have applied time and time and time and time again, it honestly just takes a lot out of our schedule to like look through all of them. So I don't love that. I'm like, I feel like a couple really great nominations go so much further than a bunch of nominations that clearly were copy and paste. So that's, I think, my biggest red flag is when people feel like they just have to flood the zone and not like trust us that we're gonna like do the reporting and like get through all the applications that come through.
A lot of people think that the list is actually very data driven and very automated, but how much it actually comes down to what you guys debate in the room?
So much of it. I think like from again that like initial application when you fill out this form online, you include information about like how much funding you have, what your revenue looks like, what your revenue model is, what makes you different, all those sorts of things. So some of that is very numerical and we can, kind of use that as like an indicator of okay, like is this someone that we should look at? But at the end of the day, like that is just kind of the first step in the process. And from finding out that someone has this amount of funding or this amount of revenue or this distribution partner, it really then comes down to okay, what else about them makes them different? What makes them stand out? How are they doing things differently from other companies within their industry or competitors? And then having those conversations among their reporters. And for context, too, like I said, for the US list, we have 20 categories. For Europe, we have 10. And each of those categories has at least three reporters working on it. So as those applications come in, we're always talking to each other about, like, okay, do we want to move this person on to the next round? Do we need more information here to like learn more about this before we make that decision? So much of it is about like the reporters deciding and kind of like having a better understanding of like what they are in the general market. And one more thing I'll add to that too is we also bring on a panel of 4 judges for each category every year. And so this is an additional way to make sure that it's not just like a numerical number that's, moving someone along, but like how the judges feel like they are shaping up in the industry and whether or not the judges feel like they have the potential to break through because these judges are experts in that industry specifically. So they have a really good insight and like viewpoint on who's coming up right now and their own experience being in the industry. So it's so much collaboration, and like the more collaboration that we can have, oftentimes like the better the list is because we get as many ideas in there as we can to make sure it's not just like little old me deciding who's on the under 30 list every year.
That's really cool. And then you said you're covering so many categories, and besides AI, watching what industry do you think it's gonna boom in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think of course, like to your point, AI is going to be the biggest growth as far as funding goes, especially. But I'm really excited to see how the consumer industry takes shape. I think that for a long time there were like consumer brands that were being started for like especially when the kind of creator side of things, and I know we'll talk about creators as well, but when creators really started growing, there were a lot of like merch companies or people like putting their names on something quickly, and I think that that kind of like fizzled out and people like did not really the consumers like didn't totally buy into that. And I think that recently I've seen a ton of really cool consumer brands pop up and use things like the digital platforms like this pickle company that I was talking about to like be more some of that like creator identity while building a really really great product. So I'm excited to see how that changes moving forward. And I think, consumer for the last couple of years, as far as finances went, was like consumer is dead. Like no money's going there. They're not going to IPO. They're not going to exit. So like, why would we as investors invest in this? And of course, that's not the same for all investors. But with the rise of AI, like so much of the attention has been forced over there. So I'm excited to see how people are like building their companies without fundraising in the future. And like, is it crowdsourcing? Maybe is it like private equity? Is it angels or is it just bootstrapping? Which I think oftentimes is an indicator of like a company, especially on the consumer side of things, that really has the potential to be successful if they can just like support themselves with their own revenue and with their own sales from the beginning. I think that that is what more and more consumer companies are relying on right now, and I think will make for better companies in the future.
I think people that can bootstrap from the beginning
Hmm.
and get it profitable, they already have this proof that it's going in the right direction. And from there, you just need to think how you scale.
Exactly.
It was pretty much the case for our company as well. We only took some investment for building a better website, but then everything else was bootstrapped because the concept was already there before we even doubled down into the production side.
And then you can understand what your customers want too. If like you
Yeah,
already
yeah,
have
yeah.
those customers coming in and you're already building like that network of people and that like feedback, I think that directly leads to like, okay, what's next? How do we want to pivot? Do we need to change anything? Like just taking that customer feedback and having like a large pool of people to give that feedback to you from the early ages of your company, I think is like it just allows you to kind of fast track this decision making. So it's not just you in your head. And this is like, number one rule of business is like address a need in or a hole in the market, not just like what you want to exist. And so I think it allows you to do that a little bit faster.
100%. I think when I started, I was looking at everything that I can do in the pandemic because I didn't have a job.
Mhm.
So I was looking at drop shipping at the
Yeah.
beginning. Then I was trying to create an app for creatives, but like the Fiverr, but for the music
Mhm.
industry. Then I realized how much investment you actually need to do that.
Right.
And then I started picking up a camera and started doing things. And then I was looking at industries that weren't as competitive already in the social media
Mhm.
space. So I ended up in real estate, funny enough. And then slowly, I found that gap in the market. But before I even opened the company, everything was just trying to do as much work as I can for feedback
Right.
to see where it's going and where is the demand.
Mhm.
And I think that really shaped the trajectory of our company today. But can you tell me, in the companies that you spoke with and the founders, what is the mindset that you see predominant in most of the people that have made it?
I think that there's like kind of two parts to this, and one is there needs to be a level of like relentlessness that you're willing to put yourself through and exude to others that really shows like I'm so fully committed to this. I believe in this so much. This is like, I will do anything to kind of like get my brand and my name out there respectfully, of course. Like you don't want to be bombarding people necessarily, but that like really relentless belief in what you're building, I think is like the number one thing. But on the flip side of that, like having some humility about it and like maybe your idea from the get-go needs to change. And like back to that feedback, like whether it's from a customer, from an investor, from an advisor, like there needs to be a little bit of willingness to like mold a little to the market without being that expensive, like what you're trying to build or like what the ethos of the brand is. So I think it's like kind of having that balance of like I'm so committed to what I think I want to build here and what I think will work here, but at the same time, like I'm willing to take this outside opinion and not be like so tunnel vision focused on my goals or my ideas or my vision that I like miss what else could be a good addition to this or could be a good pivot or could be a good change. So I think it's like balancing that really carefully and being super intentional too about what you're building. I think that like whether it's time management or like not trying to do too much at once, like I think for a lot of founders, there's a it can you can easily get pulled in like, okay, I'm building this, and then also there's someone wants this, so I'm gonna build that, and then someone wants this, and then I think this will help it grow, and then I think I want to build this on social media, and I want to do a social series, and da 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 da. Like there are so many ways that you can like try and do, but sometimes like simplifying a bit and like focusing and being really intentional on like what you are building, and not getting distracted by all the noise. I think like all those things go together for that like mindset that ends up working.
We're seeing a lot of creators actually starting a lot of businesses nowadays, and they turned out to be quite
Mhm.
successful. Why do you think that changed now?
It's such an exciting thing to watch how the ability to become an entrepreneur is just like so democratized now. So many people, anybody can start something at very, very little cost with things like social media. I think that why it's worked is because creators as humans and as themselves had been able to build the customer loyalty, the marketing reach, and like the buy-in that brands have been trying to do forever. And so when a brand starts, like there's not necessarily that like one-to-one connection that consumers feel. When a creator grows their platform, they have that with their consumers and like or their viewers. And whether that's like good or bad that we all feel like we have parasocial relationships with people online, like that's a different conversation. But I think because people feel that way, they feel like, they're viewing this content and they know this person, they buy into their story, they like want to be there to support them. And consumers can, I mean, creators can just like reach so many people in that intimate of a way or that intimate of a feel, that I think it's really, really ripe for if you are the right person. I don't think every creator is the right person to build a brand, and I don't think every creator wants to build a brand or like a company. But I think like if you are a creator who's been able to generate that customer loyalty, that audience, and that reach, and you do have something that you want to create on top of that, like that's what brands have been struggling with forever. So you kind of have already done that step of like doing your beta testing or whatever it is to kind of like get people involved, get people to buy into whatever is next for you.
I spoke to a lot of PR companies for a completely different purpose, but what I realized is that they started representing a lot more
Mhm.
creators than the traditional media people that they used to before. And one thing that they told me is that most of them don't realize the leverage that they have and they really downplay
Yeah.
their platforms. Do you think, in general, when creators are trying to build a business, do you think they actually realize the leverage and the power that their platform holds?
I think some do, and I think that the ones that recognize that are the ones that are able to succeed in this way. But I think at the same time, not like I said, not every creator wants to leverage it in the same way as the creator next to them. So I think like whether that's like what your worth is for brand deals, I think that was something that really, especially for women in the industry and women of color especially, like there was a lot of conversation about like we are getting paid less than our counterparts. So like a lot of that conversation started happening about just like worth and leveraging like you and your brand in that way. But I think on the business side of things, it's just like comes down to if you're a creator that wants to build something else, because building a personal following, building a personal brand, building a digital business is a very different thing from building like a product or a service. So I think it just comes down to like if that's something that you want to devote your time and energy and money into. But I hope more of them realize that they do hold this power because, to what I was saying earlier, like this is what brands have been trying to do for so long to generate that kind of power. So I think it definitely exists with creators, and it's just a matter of like how they want to move forward with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And speaking of women in the industry that do it really well, you interviewed Alex Cooper, and her model is absolutely amazing. She's built one of the most loyal podcast audiences in the world with Daddy Gang, turning her audience into global businesses. Can you tell me what is the difference between creators that know how to turn that audience into a business and the ones that remain influencers?
I think that this is something that a lot of creators are like struggling with right now, or maybe not struggling with, but like coming to terms with like this is a different way to grow. For the people and the creators that want to continue to build their own brands, work with, other brands, whether it's through sponsorship deals or campaigns or whatnot. I think that they've done a really good job of that. Like that's been a model that's kind of been proven out and pretty successful in terms of like taking another brand and telling it to your audience. On the other side of it, to your point about the Alex Coopers of the world, it's just such a different mindset to be building a business that, and for her it's a bit different because it still is connected to her pretty closely, but there are also aspects of her brand for like the Unwell Network in general, for her media trending, like or her media company trending. There are other aspects that aren't Alex Cooper in front of the camera, and I think that is a differentiator to like having it not be reliant on you on that day in that seat. And it has allowed her to invest in other types of companies, like the drinks that she now produces, her multiple podcasts that are on the network, other production that she's working on with her company Trending. So live events and her live events, she's typically there. But I think you have to be able to like remove yourself from it and build without you being necessarily like the face of it in the same way that you were before. And I think also it's about like building a really strong team around you. So many people, so many founders that I talk to, and I think this really goes for creators who are doing what you're saying there of like turning it into a global brand, not just like a creator brand. They have to hire people that know how to do it because building a business, which like there are so many things about it that if you haven't done it, you don't know about it. Whether that's like finances or team building and hiring or management in all these different ways. Like it's a different mindset, and I think that bringing on the people who understand all those different aspects and all the intricacies of what it takes to build a company is really critical for creators to turn into like CEOs of companies that are going to be like much larger than them.
Yeah, she also talks a lot about negotiating from a position of confidence and control. Do you think that comes with the experience and with the team that she's built, or do you think she always had this kind of founder mindset first?
I think a little bit of both. Obviously, like she is a personality. She is, confident in herself and meeting her and talking to her like that comes across for sure. But in my conversations with her, she actually talked a lot about how partnering with her now husband, Matt Kaplan, who's a producer and like a long time like kind of like leader in the production and Hollywood industry, he was kind of the one that was like gave her some of that like either insight or business knowledge or like push to then go be a businesswoman herself. And so I think whether it's like a partner or her team at large, like I think it does come through experience and through almost like faking it till you make it. You know what I mean? And so I think like certain people are born with a leadership quality or like a confidence or a charisma, but like in any industry, like to be a really good leader and to build a brand that has a large impact, like so much of it will be gained from just doing it and doing it and doing it and growing and iterating and something goes wrong and you fix it and you change it. So I think like experience cannot be underestimated in that sense.
Yeah, but I also love a good power couple and a good
Yeah.
support circle around you. I think that can really bring you up or down at the
Yes.
same time more than you can even imagine.
100%, and I think, like, so many people I talk with, whether it's their co-founder or someone else in their life, like, they totally speak to that of, like, I'm spending so many hours on my business every week, and I, like, don't have time to, like, make dinner, or and so my partner helps with that, or, like, I have a really strong understanding of this aspect of the business, but not something else, so my co-founder comes in and, like, that's what they bring to the table, and I think that it's so important to have that, like, network around you, of yeah, just, like, people that you can turn to and lean on and ask questions to. I think like back to what you were asking before about like what the mindset is for people who have been very successful. And I was mentioning there like humility, like being willing to like hear that outside noise. And I think being willing to ask for it is super important as well. Or ask for that advice. Like when it's the right person, when it's the right advice. I think that yeah, we can't be scared to like ask for help when we're like starting out in our careers or our businesses because other people have done it before. Maybe not in the same way, but even if it's in a different way and you don't want to do it that way, then that also helps inform like how you might want to do it.
And speaking of the women founders of the world, do you think that we build businesses in a different way?
I think that so many of the women that I have interviewed, and like I was saying before we started recording, like I tend to interview a lot of women, maybe just by accident, because I feel I can relate to them in some way. So many of them are super communal. So like to our point about having people around you, I think like so many, especially young women founders, have been able to find other young women founders to bring into their circle like the number of people that I've met either through the under 30 list or just like in the world that then know someone else that I know in that same world because they like were both founders and they wanted to ask each other questions and like go through this experience together is super high. Like it's super popular for the women founders that I've spoken with and gotten to know to have that around them. And I think too, like comparatively, like it is just a different experience to be in any career as a woman versus a man in this world. And I think that I was actually having a conversation that we shot in London a couple days ago with a female founder who's like been massively successful, and she was explaining her fundraising journey, and she's like and the comparison between like what a man might experience, and her biggest takeaway was like as a woman coming into any room you have to be more prepared than you can even imagine. Like you can have zero holes in your business plan. You can have zero, things that they can poke through or question or not totally believe if you want to ultimately like get that buy-in and that funding. So I think that like I hope that women can, be more and more like confident so they can bring this like belief to the table. And there's that stat that like women are 30% less confident than they should be, and men are 30% more confident than they should be. Which I think like totally sometimes comes true during the founder experience. And of course, there are plenty of great founders that are guys as well. But I think for the women, like it really is that you have to be like so secure in what you're building, both like your belief but also like literally on paper when you're bringing it to investors or consumers or whatnot. But turning to those around you, I think, has been a really popular thing that I've seen, and I think like it's so important to be able to have that too.
I think one of our strongest assets as female founders is community.
Hmm.
And just a touch point on what you mentioned, a couple of days ago, I've been to an event organized by Wise, the
Hmm.
bank,
Yeah.
and the numbers have shocked me. I knew there was a gender discrepancy, but the numbers have shocked me. I think they were saying about 2.3% is the funding that's globally allocated for women. That's about $6 billion. But about $250 billion
Hmm.
is allocated for men or all male funding teams. That is insane.
It's insane, and I'm concerned about with how much money is being funneled towards AI and how many men are building an AI and how many women are not, that's only going to continue to, like, be exacerbated even more. And so I think, like, I would advise so many more women to, like, be building where the money is, but at the same time, like, it's also not, women's fault that money isn't going towards us necessarily. So it is concerning, and it's shocking to hear those numbers, and we think about them all the time. And as far as under 30 list goes too, like it's a consideration we have when we're looking at the candidates that come through. Like we recognize that women and women of color and people of color are going to have less funding than a white man will. And so when we see funding numbers on the page, of course, like, there are so many conversations go into this, but we understand the industry at large here, and we want to make sure that it's, like I said earlier, not just the numerical number that pushes people through, because so many of these like industry and global stats exist, and that is not really reflective of people's success or innovation or great ideas. It's a reflection of like where investors want to put their money, because oftentimes investors are also white men.
What's even crazier to that is the stats that women actually reach profitability
Yeah.
faster and we give better ROIs altogether. Um, and that is should be proof enough that
Mhm.
you should allocate a lot more funds into it. I think another one of these stats that I just went down a rabbit hole with it, but another one of these stats was saying if this gender gap wouldn't be here, women would be responsible for more than 200 billion brought into the UK economy. So there's something that should be done here. But I think that there is actually quite a positive trend because they were saying by 2030, women should reach at least 10 more percent
Mhm.
of the global funding, which is slow, but it is something.
It is something, and I think, like, to your point, like, there are stats that prove that women founded teams, women led teams are successful, and so I hope that people rely on some of these numbers as like proof of concept moving forward. If we don't want to take too much risk, like the numbers are there to back up that women led teams are likely to do well. So I totally agree with you on that.
I think even when I got into business and I started doing this when I was about 23,
Hmm.
I agree with what you said that when you go into a room, you actually need to be twice as confident. You need to have all of your answers ready because you're going to be put to jump through hoops a lot more than a
Hmm.
guy would. But just to even the score a little bit, I would love to speak about a very successful man as well that you interviewed, Stephen Bartlett. And he built an entire global business ecosystem from what started to be a podcast,
Hmm.
besides his previous media business. Do you think podcasts are now an entry way into building a media company?
In some ways, I do, but I think podcasts are more like a funnel of distribution than like an entryway into other aspects of a media company. And like the media industry is something that I cover a lot. And so podcasts of a variety of like formats and reasons falls into that. And so I think it can be kind of split in two ways here. Two trends that I'm seeing is one, people are building their podcasts and then expanding to networks, to other media distributions, to, like the Alex Coopers and the Stephen Bartletts of the world, building it to be a multimedia global platform. And those are working for a select few number of people. Where I see podcasts coming more into play right now is actually for companies who are using it to share their messaging. So is it like a consumer brand, like I was mentioning earlier, using podcasting or like other digital distribution channels to grow their audience or build brand awareness or have these sorts of conversations to bring that network together? What I'm seeing more often, a way that startups are using podcasting to grow. On the flip side, though, so many creators are starting podcasts today, and I do think that like I would love to see more women in the industry. I was having this conversation just the other day, just about how first of all, women love to talk. Like we like to yap. Like it's sometimes our favorite thing to do, and like there are so many podcasts started by men of them talking about a variety of different things, and like that's great, but I wish more women would get into this space as well. Also, I just think that there are so many like insights that we would have on a variety of different things that like it's maybe we just, I don't know, maybe women don't care to monetize it, but I think there is a way to do so through podcasting. But even just like representation wise, I would love to see more women getting in this space and sharing their voices and talking about the things that we feel matter, and having the conversations that we feel like could make a difference. So I don't know. I don't know if I've like totally like closed my thought chain on that, but there's so many ways that podcasting is changing the many different industries right now, and I don't know that I think people are just using them in different ways for sure.
We slowly start seeing that. I was researching a lot of female podcast led
Mhm.
businesses in the UK and I couldn't find a lot. And even before we started ours, I went over the idea so much in my head and thinking, what should we do and where should we do? Well, a lot of guys have already started and
Yeah.
they have already, I don't know how many episodes. I think is being self-conscious, and also again to what you said, we're 30% sometimes less confident than men, however we shouldn't. So I took all of the pressure off this podcast and I said, let's just start it as a side project,
Mhm.
let's see where it goes. And then eventually when I got so much more confident as I was doing it, I said, okay, let's double down on this.
I think you're so right. I think it comes down to like a lack of confidence or like feeling like what I say doesn't won't matter, or like I don't have anything that different to say. And
Yeah.
like there are a lot of sports podcasts started by men that are just like recapping games or talking about athletes, which I listen to some of them, and like all that's to say is like they're not that different from each other. So I think like women can take a little bit of the pressure off of ourselves to be like so differentiated and so different and so unique. And I think that's like societal, that we've been told that like in order to be successful you have to be an exception. And I think that yeah, it would be great for us to like take some of that pressure off, to your point, and like start it as a side project, start it for fun, just like put yourself out there a little bit, because there's, like I said, so much that we have to say in this world, and I want to hear more women voices.
Speaking about the Alex Coopers and the Stephen Bartletts of the world, what do you think they understood about media, what most people miss?
I'll lean on Stephen Bartlett for this example, because when I went into that interview and we created like a feature on him video wise, we did a long form story on him, and I've kept in touch with him since then and continued to have these conversations with him. The biggest thing that I noticed that I had no idea coming into that interview was how much data they use. Like they are a data company through and through. For every single decision they make, like there is a reasoning for it. And that was so important, I think, for me as someone in media to learn and to recognize. Cause I think a lot of times we can think like media is kind of creative, and it's like, you can just, there are so many things about it that aren't necessarily from the consumer perspective, like seem like a set of data or a spreadsheet or a number. But for Bartlett and his team, like it really was every thumbnail was A/B tested. Whether it's like a hand in the frame or someone looking shocked or like someone sitting more calm, like all these things were tested compared to each other. Every like exclamation mark or quotation in a title is A/B tested. They have these technologies that they've built that basically like allow viewers to watch their shows before they go live to see like attention span, and like what if someone's looking away or if someone's really engaged. Like every single thing they do is driven by data, and of course that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources, but I think the more that we can rely on the data that is available to us in the media industry, like the more successful we will be. Because I think like so many of us feel it, just like posting on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, like there are metrics there and most people don't totally get what they mean or why they're important. But the more that you can understand that, if you are trying to build a creative business or a content business or a media business, the more that it can lead you to like what's next, what's working, what's not working, why is this working, and how can I like not only replicate that, but like build on that in a different way to keep changing things up. So I think like the Flight Story team, which is like his larger company, just like deeply understands the importance of experimentation and testing what like the actual results are.
I'm watching his shorter form videos. I think it's called Behind the Diary.
Yes, Will, who's a friend of mine, is the kind of like the brains behind that, which has been such a cool way to see like this. Because what you were asking earlier is like, for the Alex Hoopers, Stephen Bartlett that have been able to build global brands around this, and I mentioned like you have to kind of take yourself out of it a little bit, which I think like
Mhm.
across Flight Story they've done. They've done tons of investments. They have multiple different podcasts now. They have like a book, kind of vertical of their company, products, yada yada. But this Behind the Diary is like a way to be like, okay, and here's the person again, which I think consumers are still super interested in.
I'm waiting to actually appear more episodes because they don't do it as often.
Yeah.
But they also show you and they remind you again of how they started everything, all of the data, all of the research, all of the teams that go behind it. And it really puts me down to, okay, I need to spend a lot more time into the
Mhm.
analytics of it.
Yeah.
And then secondly, on the recruitment and having the team around you, the right team exactly is going to help you build that further mixed with the data, I suppose.
Mhm.
If someone is listening to this podcast today and they really dream to be on the list of 30 under 30, what would you say that they should focus on?
In order to catch our eyes as under 30 reporters, you have to have an undeniable like understanding about what you are building, and you would be shocked at the number of applicants that come through that will give us a bio, they'll give us a little bit about them, and we'll, read through their things, we'll look at their LinkedIn and whatever, and go to their website sometimes even, and I'm like, "Yeah, but what do you do? What is the company? Like, what are you selling? How are you making money?" So having that very, very, very clear explanation and like elevator pitch in a sense, even if it's in text form, about exactly what you do and why you are important is like above all the most critical component of the under 30 list. And I think too, a lot of people ask us like, oh, should we like, do we need a PR team to recommend us? Do we need like other people to refer us? Like I mentioned earlier, do we need, how many referrals do we need? No, you don't need a PR team. You don't need any other referrals. If your application clearly states how important you are in this ecosystem, that will be enough to like continue the conversation and move you on. So I think so many founders are worried about like or share things that just like quite honestly aren't super relevant for like the list itself. And of course like parts about your background and where you came from and what your like education history was or whatever can be important in some settings, and we want to learn those things about you as we move on in the conversation. But as far as that like first pitch to be on the under 30 list, like what do you do, how are you making money, and like what's the business? Like after all, it is a Forbes list, and Forbes is about businesses being built and businesses being built very successfully financially. So like those things for the under 30 list specifically are just like super important and cannot be understated in explaining like this is what I do, this is who I am, and this is why my company matters in the business ecosystem today.
In terms of journalism now, can I bring you back to your industry and to your skills? You've been doing this for quite a couple of years now. Can you tell me how journalism has changed in the last 5 years and what skills you should have right now if you want to make it in the industry?
So much has changed over the last 5 years across media in general, especially within journalism. I think like first of all, when I started my job, it was just following, or when I started my career, it was just following COVID. And people were online reading a bunch of articles because that's all we had to do during COVID because we were at home doing nothing else but like trying to keep up with what's happening in the world. And at that moment in time, page views were hugely up. Different platforms, especially like meta platforms like Facebook, were like recommending articles in a very different way and recommending news in a very different way. And people were just like reading online content, even if it was like, short content, not necessarily long form, but people were just clicking on news articles a lot. And over even just the last 5 years, last 4 years, like that has drastically dropped. It has drastically changed. I think like the rise of video platforms has been a huge reason for that. Right now, so many, especially young people, and I think about this a lot for the under 30 list specifically, because not only are the people we're covering young, but the people who we want to reach are also young. It's a little bit different of an audience than the Forbes audience in general. And they're on social media. Like they're getting their news through video platforms. They're getting their news through audio platforms. So like the video side of things, the podcasting side of things, it's just like revolutionized how news is being shared, I think. And as like an industry, I think that we need to really pay attention to how we can keep up with that. And so I don't want the written word to go away at all. I think there's like a huge actually crisis in people not reading enough. So I don't want to give up on the written word and like long form, stories and long form articles. And it's also just like fun for me to write too, to be able to do a long written piece. But I think like there needs to be a way for journalists today to diversify how they're getting their story out there. So like maybe it is the written word, and then it's also the newsletter, and it's also a podcast clip, and it's also the long form podcast or whatever it may be. And that's like kind of what we're trying to do at Forbes and on our team as well. Is just like trying to find those different ways to diversify how we're connecting with audiences, because no longer is everybody searching Forbes.com to get news. Like, probably one person a day is doing that. And it's me when I'm trying to find like a source that I need for our newsletter or something like that. So I think that like it's just people are engaging with media so differently, and we have to, as an industry, keep up with that. And so to your question about like what should journalists now be good at, I think like multimedia for sure. Being able to like either sit in front of a camera or interview someone in front of a camera has been hugely helpful for me in my career. But also being able to write, also being able to do live events, like just being able to tap into as many of these new and very quickly growing platforms as possible, and be willing to experiment with it. I think like that is what journalists will need to do moving forward.
Speaking of new distribution, what do you think of the rise of Substack?
First of all, I love Substack. I subscribe to many different newsletters on the platform, and I think it's kind of to our point earlier about like how creators have been able to find this like loyal audience that brands sometimes are not able to. I think Substack creators and Substack authors are able to do that in a way that traditional media platforms are not really able to today. So I love the rise of Substack. I love the rise of newsletters in general. And like I said, there are many that I follow, and I think it's a really great way to get like individual insights on something, especially the Substack authors who are like really intentional about like what their voice is, and like have a really clear definition about like this is the type of story I will write, and this is how I will write it and who I'm trying to reach. Because as an individual creator, like it can be very easy to just like do whatever's on your mind and write it however you want that day or whatever. So I think that the Substack creators that are able to like have their Substack voice and their own author voice and have that be consistent, has been amazing. I have a friend, Tariro McConey, who is on the under 30 list as well, who writes a Substack called Trademarked. And she talks about kind of like the combination of like luxury goods, business, like a little bit of like the wellness industry, but more from like a luxury perspective, like what like up and coming people and cool people are interested in, and like economy and how all these things like fuse together. And I think she does just a phenomenal job of like having such a strong voice in her platform. And there are so many others that I love as well. At the same time, though, I think that there is potentially going to be a bubble burst of like how many individual subscriptions a consumer can pay for. And I think like we're seeing this with Netflix and Hulu and HBO and la. Like I cannot buy that many subscriptions a month. And so like in some ways I'm like, are we going back to cable? Like, do I want cable back? Like, how can we get all this in one place? And so I do wonder with the Substacks of the world or the Beehives or whatever these different newsletter platforms are, like where the threshold is for consumers not wanting to pay for individual things when it's not like kind of consolidated in a sense. So we'll see where it goes from here. I'm really excited about the number of really really talented journalists and writers and authors on the platforms. But I am interested to see like how far consumers are willing to go in terms of like paying for these individual subscriptions, and having to kind of like do it themselves of like picking and choosing like who do I want to listen to, and I have to kind of search just myself or actively sign up for it, as opposed to kind of like centralized news in a sense, which I don't think one is better than the other. But I am interested to see like where the line is for how consumers will continue to engage with it.
I think that's quite an interesting trend because I was reading some articles and they were saying that we're moving from ownership to subscription based
Yeah.
models for pretty much everything. And I personally am afraid to check how many subscriptions I have.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, still something that is growing in terms of having subscriptions instead of paying upfront
Hmm.
for something that you're not really sure if you're ready to commit
Totally.
with. But at the same time, I think this is where building brand loyalty matters a lot, because if we're just so easy at subscribing here and then unsubscribing and going over there, I think building your loyal audience, and this
Mhm.
is probably going back to how you build a good business from a creator perspective, having that loyalty with your audience and understanding, I
Mhm.
think, above all, is really what is actually going to prompt success long term.
I think too, like with the rise of creators, with the rise of Substack creators or just independent people, there so many consumers have really latched on because they feel like they can trust them immediately or they just do trust them immediately. And I do, from like a traditional journalism perspective though, really want to like make sure people understand that at news publications like Forbes, for instance, and I can't speak for every single news publication, but for many news publications, like there are significant like lengths that we go to fact check everything, a legal team to make sure that we're like fully complying with all sorts of things, like a large team of both the journalists, the editors, producers, like so many people come together to make these things possible, to make them accurate, to make sure that like we're framing things in the right way. And so I do think like with the rise of a lot of like just a lot of voices online. I want consumers to also make sure they're paying attention to like, is this person actually an expert in what they're talking about, or are they just talking about it? And so I think that's another thing that like we have to walk the line of making sure that like people can have these platforms, share their own voice, but also understanding like, is this a legitimate news source or is this someone's opinion? And those are can be two very different things that I think consumers can just become a little more savvy with, and I hope that they do become a little more savvy with moving forward.
I hope as well, but I think that's going to become incredibly difficult going forward because of
Mhm.
the rise of AI content as well. And then people don't go to that length to do their due diligence.
Yes, exactly, and yes, like, no answer and also concerned. So, like I said, we'll see, like, what happens with it, but I think that, like, that's why I think as traditional news platforms like Forbes, like, we have a really big responsibility to find the readers where they're at or to find the viewers where they're at, because we do have all these things in place to make sure that, like, the news we're sharing is, like, accurate and legit and timely and all the things that you would want a news source to be and unbiased. And so I think, like, if we with all of those resources can find a way to connect with people in the same way that Substack creators are with that, social media creators are, like that's going to be the way that traditional news will succeed moving forward.
And through all of your interviews of founders, has there been a story that has stayed with you emotionally?
I wrote actually at Insider a story about a founder of a shoe brand who is based in Ukraine, and I talked to her like just after the war broke out there a couple of years ago, and she was telling me about how she was like continuing to run her business because it was like important to her, and it's her livelihood for one, but also that like it was becoming a kind of like beacon of hope for people that like if they could buy a pair of shoes, like that's a luxury, and like in times of war, like if that was something that they felt like they wanted to and could spend their money on, it just like was a semblance of normalcy in a sense, and like of celebration of life and like of moving forward. And so I think like that one really just like from an emotional perspective, like it reminded me, I mean, one, she's just like a phenomenal woman, but also it reminded me of like there's so much more that these businesses can mean than just like the money on the page. Like it can do so much more for people's well-being and community and like hope for the world. And so that was an instance where like I really did feel that one has definitely stuck with me.
Has your definition of success changed in any way?
I in some ways, yes. I think like especially from a Forbes perspective, like the financial success is important to us as a brand, and it's also a really good way to identify like just on a objective basis, like is this company doing well or not. But I think that there are just so many different ways to be successful today. I think that like companies that are able to be really creative while making money is a huge version of success in my mind, especially as like AI content and AI slop is becoming so prevalent. Like the companies that are able to like stand out by like putting the time and energy and money into like production value or creative ideas and still like maintain most, well viewed platforms or well viewed campaigns or just like really connect with consumers in a really impactful way. I think that is, and especially moving forward, going to continue to be like a more and more important metric of success is like maintaining true to like the human side of what you're building while also making money along the way.
I think it's going to be such a scarce thing to actually have human craftsmanship in a
Yeah.
world that most of the content will actually be created by AI.
100%. And I think that this is also a conversation I've had a lot recently of like AI platforms versus humans, like we can do a lot of the same things maybe, or like it's getting closer and closer, but like humans have taste and AI platforms do not have taste. And like, how do we maintain tastefulness? And like, whether it's, your taste or someone else's taste or whatever, but like, there is a really, really human centric like nature to like what makes something attractive to consumers or to viewers or whatever. And I think a lot of that does come down to like, what's your taste in something? What's your like aesthetic? That an AI platform cannot always replicate. And I think like at least as for now, and maybe this will change in the future, but like consumers can also feel that a bit. So yeah, I think it's super important to have that like the human behind it.
Is there an advice or a learning that has stuck with you through pretty much everything that you would tell people right now?
I think like you cannot be shy to like try it. And I think that this is something that a lot of founders tell me too. And like, just do it, just like put your stuff out there, whatever. But I even think about like in my own career when I was in college, I was like, oh, do I want to be a journalist? Like maybe I'll start writing things. And I was like very nervous to start putting stuff out there. And like, who cares? Like, this is so cringe, like da da da. But like, had I not written those random clips or started my own like random websites or started, reaching out to people to interview them for very small projects at very niche publications for internships or whatever, like I would never have gotten the kind of like footing that I needed to build my career. So I think like you just have to like commit to it and like not be nervous to. I think something that has been like a very popular phrase recently is like cringe is the price of entry in our current world. And I think that's like so true. And I think like it's also advice I can continue to take for myself. And what we were talking about earlier, like I think a lot of young women should take the advice of like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like put this stuff out there, do the stuff. Keep just don't be shy about like trying for something. So I think like on a I don't know, maybe like emotional level, that's my best piece of advice. On more of like a tactical level of advice, I think like for journalists, it can be like discouraging to get edits you don't like. And also know that edits from two different editors will be entirely different from one another. So just like take as much feedback as you can and try to apply it and just like work through the edits you get. And I think that this goes for any industry, like whether it's edits or being reprimanded from your boss or whatever, to try and like work through it and know that like the people that have been in these industries for a long time, like they actually do know what we're doing as much as Gen Z has tried to and successfully come in and like shaken some things up. Like they are industry vets for a reason. So take advice and like digest it and use it for your next thing that you're gonna turn in or whatever. So
I was speaking recently to a friend of mine about getting feedback and getting advice from
mhm.
people, but I would also add on to that, be very careful who you ask for
Yes.
advice from, because a lot of people will not necessarily be qualified to speak
Hmm.
from. So, as you said, if you're doing really well in your industry, let me reach out to you on LinkedIn. Let me just ask your opinion or something. Because if you already gone through all of these steps, it means that you're giving me a blueprint
Hmm.
of how you made it and how could I potentially get there as well.
And I think like more people are willing to help than you think. Like when I was starting my career, like I cold emailed so many people just to be like, what do you do? Like, what's a day in the life? What is it like to be a journalist? And sometimes I would never hear back from them, and I still have never heard back from them. But like honestly, I had so many cold calls with people being like, this is like what my job is. This is how much you should not get paid because a lot of companies will try and pay you $30,000 a year in the US, which is like just not that's you can get paid more than that. Like things like that were so important for me to hear from people in the industry. Or just like, as far as like the future of journalism goes, like maybe focus some on video stuff, be able to use social, like find ways to distribute your stories in different ways. Really know like what a industry or what a publication's like mission is and like the types of stories they write before you start pitching to them. Like all those little things that like maybe are common sense after you hear them, but they're not before you hear them. I think are they only come from those cold calls and like reaching out to people that you like value and respect and have like to your point like truly done something interesting in the industry that you're looking to go into.
Speaking about the future of business, do you think the next generation of millionaires and billionaires would come from more traditional ecosystems, more Silicon Valley, or more creators?
Okay. So I think like of course AI startups are going to lead to a lot of definitely millionaires and definitely billionaires moving forward just because these valuations are like skyrocketing, the funding going into them are skyrocketing, the use cases are also like pretty skyrocketing as well as far as like what either AI agents or different AI platforms can be used for. That being said, a conversation I've been having with my dad a lot is about like boring businesses or like businesses that have maybe existed for a while and now are being like passed down from like the boomer generation to Gen Z as we're like kind of stepping in and they're stepping out. And so whether that's like, I don't know, like manufacturing stuff, trade stuff, other things that like we wouldn't think of as like sexy industries right now. I think there's going to be a lot of financial turnover in those industries within the next couple of years. And I do venture to guess that like a lot of the Gen Zs that step into those roles or take over those businesses or buy those businesses are going to be able to continue to build them even faster than they've been built before while building them on top of what was there before. So like will hopefully lead to more success for them. And so I think like the AI definitely and the creative industry, I hope, because I that's those are the companies that I'm most excited by. But I do also think that this kind of like the as opposed to starting a business, acquiring a business, or building a business that might seem like a little bit boring or like is not in the most like you know exciting or sexy industry will actually be like a huge opportunity for Gen Z right now to kind of continue to like take leadership roles, C-suite roles, whatever it is, across a ton of different businesses over the next like 10 years.
I really love what Cody Sanchez does with her contrarian thinking
Mhm.
in the US, and I've been studying her work. But I really hope that eventually in Europe we are going to start having this as well. I
Mhm.
don't think we are yet at that point that we can start buying these boring businesses as easily, but I think we're slowly
Mhm.
coming to having these portfolios of boring businesses in here as well, because her model goes against everything that, as you said, like everything is with AI, everything is automations. But she's like, no, buy those boring
Right,
businesses.
the laundromats, like the other
Yeah.
things that we need them in our society, but people don't think of, like, when you're younger, like, "Oh, I would love to run a business like that one day," just because we don't think about it. They seem to just be there, not like this startup that, like, people have built from the ground up, but, like, someone did build that from the ground up, you know?
And they have no idea how much money actually that can bring. And
Yes,
then you start building a portfolio of them. And then soon enough, you're going to start having all of this passive income that you had
totally.
no idea that it could come.
And to your experience with real estate, like, I'm sure you felt that as well, like, you did from the real estate industry, like, again, like, these are not things that you think of as, like, startups, but as far as, like, wealth generation, like, definitely an opportunity to build wealth in those different spaces.
100%. I think when I started in real estate here, it was just on the back of the
Mhm.
pandemic. So everyone was thinking, oh, you can't make this industry sexy on
Right.
social media. Look at it now. While every real estate agent has a personal brand, has
Yeah.
a personality online. So it evolved so quickly.
Mhm. And I watched those TikToks all the way through when they're like, "This is what you can get for $10 million in New York." Could I buy that? Absolutely not. Am I watching the whole video? Absolutely.
Would I love to comment on that kitchen? Because I
Yeah.
just don't like the flooring or
Why
the
would you have
bathroom.
that couch in there? Like, that is not my vibe at all, but no, 100%.
Alex, thank you so much. But before I let you go, I would love to ask you some fire questions. You
Okay.
can answer either in a word or in a sentence. Are you ready?
Yes.
What's the biggest myth that people have about getting on Forbes turning under 30?
That you pay for it, which you do not. No one's even offered, which I wouldn't accept anyway, but you can't pay to get on it.
What's the number one reason why someone doesn't make it on the list?
Lack of clarity.
What are the industries that are producing the most exciting founders right now?
I actually think healthcare has a lot of really cool companies starting right now. Like, this is gonna be longer than a sentence, but, like, whether it's telehealth platforms that are, like, making a lot of money or, like, companies maybe using AI or different technologies to do things like cure cancer or develop cells, there's a lot of innovation happening there right now, so that's been pretty cool to watch, and I don't cover it as closely as some other industries, but whenever I do talk to someone in that industry, I'm like, "You, like, legitimately are gonna be saving lives with this," so that's super exciting to see.
What mistakes do creators make when they are trying to turn an audience into a business?
Not having that, like, CEO mindset and being able to step away from your own personal brand for the sake of, like, what else you're trying to build.
What industry today is completely underestimated?
I don't know if I have an industry that's underestimated, but maybe, like, a way of building that I think is underestimated, which is, like, more of this human-led approach. Like, I think there's been so much focus on AI. So maybe for the media industry specifically, I'll say, like, still having the humans lead these things, like, we will not be able to continue to grow without them. So, I think, like, a lot of industries are getting a lot of hype right now in their own ways, but being able to, like, keep humans at the forefront, I think, like, we need to not overestimate the power of AI.
Do you think the next billion-dollar founders will come from Silicon Valley or from the internet?
The internet.
What is the hardest truth about entrepreneurship that people don't want to hear?
I think there's just a huge misconception around what entrepreneurship is, and I think that so many founders I talk to say, like, "If I knew what this would be like before I started, I would not have started it." So I think, like, there's a lot of, like, glamorizing of it online, and so I think there's just, like, a misunderstanding about what the day in and day out of being a business owner is, that I think you people won't understand until they're in those shoes.
I agree with you. I do think I had an understanding of what I signed up for, but
Mhm.
no one told me how many gray hairs I would
Yeah.
have. Too young.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about my journey.
My pleasure. Thank you.